Hello and welcome to another episode of Staying Power, a show that is all about building a better life. And we mean that in lots of ways. So whatever you think we mean when we say that, we probably mean it. And each week we come together to talk about one element of building a better life, and we hope that it resonates with you in your life. And we hope to hear from you in all the different ways that you can reach us. And by us, I mean myself, JDK Winnikin. And alongside for the ride, once again, kind of co-piloting this airplane as we do loop-de-loops in the sky and, all that kind of stuff is Ashley Knievel. Hi, Ashley.
Hello. I'm always so curious how you're going to introduce me, and it's just improving every week.
Well, that's good. That's good. So how are you?
I'm doing great. Look, the sun's out where we live. It's beautiful, and there's just a couple of puffy clouds, but that's
I know.
It's
It's
so
T-shirt
nice.
weather in the Northwest, which is always great.
Weather.
Yeah.
Speaking of T-shirts,
Oh, yeah?
for our listeners cannot see it, but our
Oh, sure.
viewers can, unless, they check out our social media later, then you'll see it. But
Right.
you are wearing a shirt that you actually had on again recently.
Oh, yeah.
A couple episodes ago.
Oh,
you
man,
were
I
wearing
very
it.
rarely do repeat T-shirt wears, too.
Only if it's a good shirt.
Only if it's a good shirt, and it is. It's my Broke Them Out shirt. And for those of you who missed the first time I talked about this a few weeks ago, Broke Them Out. This shirt is from one of our favorite places anywhere. In fact, our favorite collaborative spot here in the Puget Sound area, Crawl Space Gastropub on Mercer Island.
Mm-hmm.
And we're big fans of it. We do a lot of our creative work there. And we've sealed some business deals there. You and I have.
We have.
And I love it. And they have really, really great Hawaiian inspired and Hawaiian dishes, Hawaiian inspired food there.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up in Hawaii. The owner, Jason, also grew up in Hawaii. And so he and I have connected over that. But you know what? I figured out, Ashley, why it works so well for us as a collaborative space. You know why?
Why?
Because it itself is a collaborative space.
Mm.
I mean, you see the staff, Jason, the owner, asking customers what they think of the food that's been made, what they think of something new.
Mm-hmm.
They ask for input on those types of
their
things.
bartenders have even asked us about
right.
new cocktails and our opinions and ideas. And
right,
things.
Exactly. It's a collaborative environment, trying different things, and the feedback they're getting is great. He just kicked off a huli huli chicken dish that literally time warped me back in time to when I was a kid in Hawaii. It's the best stuff. If you don't know what huli huli chicken is, you should find out as soon as possible.
Or you should just go to the Crawl Space.
Or go, yeah, absolutely, you should. It's centrally located in the Puget Sound on Mercer Island. You can get there from anywhere. Quick stop off of I-90 from either I-5 or 405. So you should check it out. And if you come in from out of town, if you're listening to this around the world, check it out when you get there. All right. So much love out to the Crawl Space. That's why I'm wearing their shirt. All right. So, and by the way, they weren't paying us to say that. I just want to point that out.
We eat there all the time. And I mean, we meet up there and we got talking. And then one day I was like, is that a shirt? Do you guys sell merch here? And it took off. And now JD's wearing them.
Here we are.
Here we are.
So, all right. So, Ashley.
Yeah.
It is it's a busy time. It seems like we're coming up on the Memorial Day holiday weekend as of this recording, and everybody's making their summer trips or on their way, that type of thing. So what do you feel like talking about today?
I had a topic that came up. Actually, it was like last night. Was it that I messaged you this morning? I sprung it on
last night and this morning.
It was a real quick one I sprung on you. But
okay.
I was in conversation with a colleague last night, and we were just talking about I guess we could consider this the modern day work ethic and how it is similar and or different than past generations.
Oh, man. Okay.
It was an interesting conversation. I really appreciated the conversation personally, but I also have opinions on it.
Okay. Was this a conversation where somebody was saying that younger generations have a different understanding of work ethic is?
Yeah, that's
was it like a good old days?
I mean, it was focused on today's younger generation and their idea and viewpoint of what working hard and going the extra mile looks like versus older generations. And then, we got into discussion of why is that, and different factors that might have influenced and changed different perspectives. And maybe the younger generations don't have to work as hard because there's so much technology that has supported some of that work. And so they don't have to do as much of the grind that older generations have done. But then also I'm But I feel like there was a stamina and a mentality from the older generations that it was never questioned. Like, they knew they were gonna show up and they were gonna work hard and be there until the day was done.
Ah,
And there are some people I've seen that don't have that.
they
I'm like, "Why do you not have that?"
they clock in, they clock out at the same time,
Well,
no
and they're
matter what.
burning out before they clock out.
Oh,
Like, they
right.
can't even keep the duration anymore, and I'm like, "Interesting." So, there was a
Okay.
lot of thing we were diving into that topic, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, you know what came to mind for me when you mentioned it was, yes, in the workforce realm, this is this gets talked about a lot. And for all of you listeners out there, I'm sure you can think of examples in your own work experience.
I'm sure.
And this on some level, this has probably been true for as long as there have been young people entering a workforce where older
Oh, sure.
generations are thinking you know, they're not working as hard or they don't have the same
Like, I
ethic.
milked 20 cows a day, and they're doing 10.
Right.
Okay,
Right. Come on.
slacking.
Come on, right? They're reading books and, like once upon a time, nowadays it's like people looking at their phone, whatever
Mhm,
the case may be. So on some level, this is probably there's a normal level of generational difference in
mhm,
perspective. And that's just sort of how it is. At the same time, I get what you're saying. And so what came up for me was not only could we talk about that in a workforce sense, but in a generational communication
mhm.
sense.
Sure.
Right, because the very thing you're talking about that can be a challenge in the workplace between generations can be the challenge between generations in communication in families
Yeah.
or in any kind of relationship or in society in general, certainly in our political discussions that go on, right? Not
Yes.
to dovetail into that too much, but that certainly can be the case. So it got me thinking on a few
Mhm.
things that we could talk about, but maybe we should kind of define our terms first, right? So what generation are you a part of?
By birth
I'm gen
or
by birth.
okay.
If we're gonna go with the rough classifications, right,
Okay.
which have their problems and you know, they're not exclusive necessarily. Um, where are you on that spectrum?
I believe I would fall in the millennial category.
Okay, I'm Generation X.
Okay.
My parents are baby boomers,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
So, and then that would make my niece and nephew who are in their 20s Generation Z or whatever the case may be,
Right.
right? Which is sort of
Right.
where we are now. Of course, we're naming generations. We ran out of letters or,
Yeah.
we had Z, so we're gonna go with AA or we're gonna
I
go to
mean, we could ask
AB or
Elon, I'm sure he has, like, 800 characters for the next one.
right, right. So, okay, so you're millennial.
Yeah.
So, and there's always these different classifications for these types of things. And, you know, the baby boomers kind of seen optimistic, strong work ethic, like you just said, you go until the job is done,
Mhm,
right? You don't complain about it. You're thankful for what you've got, but you're optimistic about what that hard work is going to do for you,
mhm.
right? So, how would you define millennials?
I mean, I think and this is where I'm like, I don't think I fit into my category
I'm not
because
sure you do.
they are predominantly tech savvy, which anybody who knows me, not the case. They are collaborative, which I suppose I could be that.
Mhm.
They are focused on greater good, which I think I guess that would apply to me as well. But I feel like in the Gen X, they're very independent. They're
Yeah.
very committed and they strive to be innovative and whatnot. And that's where I'm like, that sounds like me.
Yeah, you're
I'm
more
an
in that
old
side.
soul in
Yeah,
this
that
really youthful body. It's great.
independence, innovative,
Mhm.
and importance of communication. Yeah, those are big. And then, with Gen Z, I mean, obviously they know, tech
Yes,
better.
I will applaud them to the ends of the earth for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there sometimes I think people think that there's an element among Gen Z where they can just dismiss certain things, like they can just be dismissive of things that they don't like.
Mhm.
I would say for the sake of a positive conversation about it, we call it kind of practical. There's a sense of practicality. Does that practically work for me? Does it not? Does that
Sure.
matter in this context? And then, of course, they tend to do better. Study after study shows in really diverse work environments. And
Mhm.
by that, I don't mean necessarily, ethnically, gender, although it can include that, but different types of people doing different types of things. Right.
Yeah.
So that tends to be kind of where they end up, right? And, also distracted a lot, shorter attention spans, right?
Yes.
And that's not a judgment, everybody. That's
That's the
proven
truth.
fact. That's proven
Yes.
fact, study after study.
Yeah.
And that I think we can tie directly to social media and smartphones.
Mm-hmm.
Although I have to say it's true from every generation, from baby boomers on up,
Yeah.
attention spans have gotten shorter because of that
Yes.
same
Yes.
technology. It's just with Generation Z, that's happening, and it's been happening in their earliest developmental phases all the way up till today. Right. So with technology.
That's crazy.
And that creates a different dynamic,
Uh-huh.
right? That we have to look at. So, okay. So I don't know, this idea that how do we define hard work?
That's a great question. Well,
'Cause
I mean, it also depends on in what environment, right?
yes, of course. Of course.
I mean, hard work could be like physical labor, of course. It
Mhm.
could be mental strain and
Mhm.
focus. It could be a lot of emotional influence, especially if you work in like healthcare or anything like
Mhm.
that. You know, it can go a lot of different directions. But
So perhaps if we're gonna come some common terms, task accomplishment,
Mhm.
maybe project management,
Mm.
another one, maybe kind of the focus on completion of things. I mean, there's lots of different things, right? Um, so this conversation you were having,
Yes.
was it from a position of like sort of the get off my lawn kind of thing where like these young whippersnappers today don't appreciate hard work or was it more of a I can't seem to get through my understanding, whoever you're talking to, my
Mhm.
understanding of hard work and better understanding their notion of hard work and meeting in between.
I would say that essentially,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Because I manage a fair number of people, and they're all from oddly different generations. So
Mhm.
it's
How many, by the way, do you
ooh,
manage roughly?
how many? I mean, small number of people, like 14.
That's pretty good size
Yeah, I
for
have a nice little collection of circus. They're great. Love them all. But yeah, I mean, they're all
Yeah,
people. They're all
right.
unique, right? They all
And
have their own interests, personalities, whatnot.
they're from a
Um,
generational
and
kind
they're
of
all from different
spectrum.
generations, and they're all from different like cultures and backgrounds. So it's never dull. But it was kind of interesting the conversation that I was having of when I have to kind of associate my expectations with the generation that I am working with.
Yeah.
Because I can give a task to one of the older generations and they'll be there until like the end of the night because they're there to get the job
If
done.
that's what it takes,
Yeah,
right?
if that's what it takes. Like they're like committed and they're like, I'm just gonna do whatever it takes to get this done.
Mhm.
And then there are the younger ones that are like, they will sometimes they find the same way to do that task, but much quicker because they have these new innovative ideas, or they're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I have technology that can help with half of this," and,
Yeah.
that type of thing. Uh, and then the question is like, "But was it more efficient? Which one was" there and so then, when you're managing and you're trying to divvy out things and whatnot, I'm like, I can't give 'em the same task to everybody because they're all gonna approach it differently, and sometimes
Mhm.
that's great, and
Mhm.
sometimes it is difficult.
Yeah, I bet.
And I'm like, and so I'm like trying to make sure that I am approaching things in the proper way. And there are certain things I can't relate with. And
Mhm.
I'm trying to understand things that I can't relate to.
Right. Right. That makes sense. Well, and that's, in my day job, I kind of work in this
Mhm.
field, right? So it got me thinking a lot when you shared this with me about what would come to mind for me if I was, working in this situation.
Sure.
And it is a challenge in the sense that um we have to take a look. Anybody who's trying to do this kind of work and kind of bring everybody together on the same page has to start exactly with what you just talked about. Understanding what that you don't necessarily fully relate to how someone approaches problem solving or conceptualizes something or works through something.
Mhm.
That is particularly true with younger generations today
Yeah.
because of the differences in experience. And it's not just smartphones, it's not just social media. The study after study is still being compiled, and we really won't know fully for a long time what the COVID pandemic
Yeah.
did,
Right.
right, in terms of this. But it definitely had a huge impact that we're only still evaluating, right?
Mhm.
Particularly on those generations who missed a lot of school or school was shut down or they lost their social connections in the middle of
Mhm.
their most important social development phases of their life, whereas people who were established in our generations during COVID, we were connecting up for online happy hours. You were connecting with friends you hadn't seen in a while. And some of us were like, okay, this being by myself is not necessarily
Yeah, well,
such a
and,
bad thing.
like, a lot of us pivoted too and found ways to like work online and keep yourself busy and keep yourself productive and give yourself a purpose that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it has to start with that kind of awareness point that you were talking about, that you have these different people with these bringing different skill sets, different experiences, different mindsets to this, but you still are responsible as the manager for, KPIs, right? Or the key production or, indexes that you have to meet. And that can be tough. Okay. That can be really tough. And so when I was thinking about this last night, I'm like, what would I do? What would I say? I always look for, in situations like this where we focus so much on difference and that frustration, like it sounds like was part of the conversation that came up was, not necessarily frustration with people directly, but like, how do I get past this divide, right? Which can feel like a chasm, like a canyon. Is what do we all have in common? Well, it sounds really trite to say, but we're all humans.
Oh my.
So this
trite.
means we all have brains. And one thing we all have in common is our brains all have the same capacity to varying degrees, depending on age, to change, right? And to grow and for us to develop new habits and new beliefs and new practices. That is neurological fact, right? And that's, in fact, that's called neuroplasticity. And so, which is a cornerstone of the coaching that you and I do, right? So, so I think on some level, where a conversation like this can go in terms of finding a solution or kind of a way to frame it is talking about that part, right? Understanding that the way we practice ourselves, the way we do our habits, whether they're physical habits, thinking habits, emotional habits, we can grow within them and they can shift and they can change. But they don't necessarily have to do that in a way that fundamentally changes our personality or how we prefer to do things or how we think through a problem or how we get a task done, right? Or how we accomplish something. I just think that's probably a unifying factor that if we started there might lead to maybe some different solutions rather than what it normally is, right? Why don't they just do it like I do?
Yeah, because obviously my way is right.
Exactly. We tend to do that, right?
Oh,
And we tend to judge people like, well, they don't do things the way I do. And things would be so much better if I had a group of people around me who did things exactly the way that I do them. But again, study after study of effective companies and entrepreneurs and businesses show that a bunch of people who have the same skills does not lead to a healthy profit margin, does not lead to healthy growth of a company. In fact, a lot of people doing things differently, unified around a larger vision, sets of values, and with an awareness among managers of how certain people reach certain goals and giving them the opportunity to do that and giving them ownership over that tends to produce greater results. And interestingly enough, we could probably say the same thing about relationships if we did that as well.
I'm pretty sure we could.
Pretty sure we could. Okay. So how about we run with that for a little while today?
All right.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, then let's run with that when we come back from our first break. And when we come back from our first break, also, we will do our weekly segment. This week it is 2 weeks of 2 minutes of 2 weeks. 2 weeks of terror. 2 minutes of terror. We'll do that right on the other side of the break. Come back in a second.
Are you ready to discover remarkable stories of resilience and cultural connection? This is Diaspora, a show sharing the journeys of first-generation immigrants from the Indian subcontinent now building their lives in North America. Inspiring, insightful, and always engaging, Diaspora offers a unique perspective on the immigrant experience. Join me, Aditya Mehta, my guests, on the Diaspora Show every Wednesday at 2 p.m. right here on KKNW.
Don't ask me to talk. There's a lot of talk out there. Political talk, sports talk, girl talk, trash talk, and so on. But there's only one, Don't Ask Me to Talk, helmed by conversational off-roaders and podcast pals Eric Ryder and Stacey Heller. They follow every tangent they encounter, from cultural blind spots to their infamous weekly Wheelo topics. Listen wherever you listen to your fave podcasts. Subscribe and share too. Or tune in every Saturday at 3 p.m. or Tuesday at 4 p.m. on KKNW.
Going against the grain has never been this much fun. Alternative Talk 1150.
Welcome back to Staying Power. JD here with Ashley.
Hi.
It's just cracking up again.
I like the visual aspect.
I
I
know,
really hope
I know.
people watch this.
Yeah, if you're seeing this on the stream, we're having a lot of fun. You're getting a sense of our dynamic. And remember, we do have a YouTube channel. We also, you can catch this as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find episodes and more about us at 1150 AM KKNW on our show page. And in the show notes for all those things I just mentioned, you can find all the ways to communicate with Ashley and I directly, our Instagram feeds, our email, stayingpowershow@gmail.com, and lots of other things in there. So we hope that you'll reach out. And in particular, we'd love to hear your thoughts on, as you listen to today's episode, about how do you experience work ethic? What does that mean to you? And what are the most important things in terms of your ethic and the results that it can produce, either in your own life or in your relationships or in your work, whatever the case may be. Okay. So Ashley, before we continue this conversation that came out of a conversation you had, let's do our weekly segment where we each take 2 minutes to talk about something that happened in the last week that was either a terror or a triumph. Today's going to be terror, and it's really so we can get to be open and vulnerable. All the things that are so important in building a better life. Here we go. 2 minutes of terror.
Never gets old.
I know it's always good. What do you got, Ashley?
Well, mine's actually kind of a mix. If people have been tuning in for a while, they know that we do 2 different types of segments. So mine's like a little bit of a terror and a triumph. We'll start with the terror half. So as you all know, if you tune in, and our avid listeners, that I had an eye injury like 4 weeks ago now, and it's still been kind of lingering. So I have made an appointment with the doctor. We'll see how it goes. I'm a little bit nervous to see what I find out of what's going on. So it's a little unnerving. However, there is a positive spin on this. I am saving so much money and not wearing eye makeup because I can wear it, but like ever so often, every couple of days or so, that eye will just like, it's watering all day.
Oh, wow.
Like severely.
Oh, wow.
Like people are like, are you crying? Like just one side.
Just one eye.
Just one eye.
Half sad.
So yeah, right. So anyways, I'm like, well, at least I'm like saving some money here.
There you go.
But anyways, I'm like, this is also probably a problem.
The silver lining on the gray cloud, as it were.
Yeah.
Is it painful, or like, is it painful all the time, or is it
not
really...
all the time? But I do have moments where it is like excruciating, and it's very short. I can see, and that's why I thought everything was fine. And then all of a sudden, I'm getting these every couple of days. I get this like excruciating pain that only lasts for maybe 10 to 15 seconds, then it goes away. But I'm like, but it's still there. So we're going to go get checked out.
Good idea. Go get checked out.
What you got?
And if you get an eye patch, I want a photo.
The viewers will make sure that
that's true. That happens, right? Exactly.
Yes.
Okay. My 2 minutes of triumph is
triumph,
terror.
Oh my goodness.
I really want to go with the triumph. See, I clearly don't want to share this.
Wow.
Terror. Yeah. And in some ways, my response is indicative of where my terror is. I am running at full speed these days. Like, entrepreneurship is relatively new to me, and I'm enjoying it. But man, is it moving at a fast pace sometimes. And it's a good problem to have. It means I have a lot of leads. I have a lot of things I'm putting out there to, bring in contracts. And that's in the podcast realm. That's in the coaching realm. I'm doing a lot of pushing of that. And it's a lot of things to keep track of. It's a lot of things to try and bring together. And it's right now, the challenge is putting together like a cadence, a routine, how do I address this every day effectively? And I'm trying things out, some of which work, some of which don't. And the ones that don't, it's so easy to be like, oh, why did I do that? That was such a waste of time. That's not going to work. Rather than like, okay, that's not going to work. Try something else.
I feel like just from like my seat of observation of your life and all your recent independent endeavors that you're doing, it's like you have a full plate and you've learned how to organize that to a consistency that you're like, hey, I kind of have my things that I do every day. And then like something just gets tossed in there and completely obliterates all that. And you're like, have to reorganize it all over again and figure out, okay, what am I doing every day? And then something else comes
Well, and that's the challenge. You're absolutely right. Because the challenge is I'm still learning how to adjust to the unexpected, which happens every single day. So that's still a challenge for me. I'm used to in my previous work of having direct control over the things I'm putting out there. Right.
And so work ethic,
I know exactly the work ethic. Yeah. It's a challenge. So it's actually a very fitting, fitting thing.
You're welcome.
And some days are really long, like where I'm going from
Sure.
the time I get up to the time I'm winding down with a few breaks in between. But nevertheless, that's mine. All right. So with that in mind, we were talking,
mind.
we were talking about that, right? Yeah. Well, and to add on to what we were talking about, neuroplasticity and the ability of all of us, no matter our ages, to have our brains grow and adapt to new habits. The older you get, obviously, the tougher it gets, right? Plasticity among somebody who's in their 80s is really different than the plasticity that's possible
Sure.
in someone's 20s.
There is something about willingness, though.
There
the
is.
brain is a thing, yes.
There
but
is. And I think you do cultivate more flexibility. And there's more and more studies that show this. The more you practice things that help the brain and help the body earlier in life, the longer that plasticity can maintain itself even into 70s, 80s, and beyond, right? It helps explain why some people are super, super sharp at a very advanced age.
Yep.
And some people just aren't. And so that's we should acknowledge that. And you're right? Willingness, curiosity, right? The more curious people are about world around them, about people, that shows a direct connection to plasticity in the brain and changing habits. So that's part of it. But the other part is that body piece, right? The somatic work. We always talk as coaches about breathing techniques, getting grounded in ourselves, connecting with the reality of where we are literally in this moment, right? And that's helps influence plasticity as well, because the brain and the body, we might kind of see them sometimes as separate, but it's an integrated whole, right? It's an integrated whole. So what we're putting into one affects the other, right? And how we understand and engage with one affects the other, right? And we tend to be more brain oriented, more brain focused, right? Even in like mindfulness is about the mind, right? Rather than the body, right? So there's that. So with all that in mind, I think the neuroplasticity part of this is important, right? And there's a lot of things that come into that. We mentioned age, right? When you think of neuroplasticity, like you've studied this too, what are other factors that you see?
There's different things, right? Like, I think, like I said, willingness or motivation,
Sure.
how important something is for that person will
Salience, as they call that, right?
will determine how much effort and how diligent and how steadfast and
Right. You kind of have to
how
want
much
to.
oomph do they throw into that said thing. Time does matter. Like you said, as you're getting older, brain isn't quite what it was when they were younger. And the longer that you wait to start something, it will be more difficult just by the natural brain itself.
Right.
Not impossible, though. And I do think there is something to be said about, you always hear that thing, like you should be trying things that you are afraid of doing to like push and stretch yourself. But that is a fact that if you are trying new things all the time and challenging your brain and continuing it to work and it's creating new pathways, it will continue to evolve, which is like fascinating. You have an organ that sits around up there all day and you can actually like really improve it. Like I don't think it grows in size. It grows like
eventually.
inwardly.
Well, early it does.
Sure.
Obviously.
Yeah, but right.
Yeah.
As adults, it then hits its point. But the internal mindfulness of that organ can grow and expand, and like its value can increase so much.
Yeah.
And also like what you fuel, like you said, body and mind are connection, and body and brain are like they're all connected. And so it's like even what you eat will influence your brain and its functioning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I find that fascinating.
It is fascinating. And I actually heard a brain scientist, one I can't remember their name, say the brain is both the organ we know the most about and what we know the least about.
Well, isn't the organ like we only use a very small percentage?
Yeah.
Of it?
You usually hear like 10 to 12% of what. Yeah. So we're still discovering so much about it and what it can do. And there's so many things that individuals find that they're able to do in interesting circumstances that aren't always explainable. Right. But of course, the one thing is if, whatever's possible with one person in their brain, by extension, must be possible to a certain degree if rare in others. And so, yeah, there is that. And I think that part is exciting. And usually the brain is giving us cues sometimes along with our body about what those things might be that we should maybe spend some time on, right? When we're talking about things that like, oh, I would really like to do this. I'm feeling like I'm not as good at whatever it is, A,
Mhm.
B, or C,
Mhm.
but you want to be.
Right. Right.
That is your brain and your body telling you, you should try this, right? You should find a way to address this, right? It's not just something that's happening out of the ether. It doesn't just drop into us, right? These are actually signals we're getting. All right. So time matters as well.
Do you have anything that signals for you that you want to get better at?
That's right now
Yeah.
in my life.
Yeah.
Well, what I was talking about in 2 Minutes of Terror, right? Opening up more for the unexpected
Mhm.
so that it doesn't throw me off so much. It's my reaction to it.
Mhm.
I'm not as good at responding to unexpected. I just react to it. And I'd like to get better at incorporating the expectation of the unexpected,
Makes sense.
right?
Yeah.
With that, right? And so, but the thing is when we practice these things, I think they call it transference. When we practice these things, the more we do that, the more it sets in our brain, gives our bodies the message that, oh, we like
Mhm.
doing this. So for
Mhm.
example, you know, exercising on a regular basis. That's something you and I have in common, right? We tend to seek it out now because our brain and our bodies have experienced, whoa, you feel good when you do this,
Mhm.
right? This feels good to do, right? You like how you feel afterwards. You like how you look over time, right? You're more alert, right? It creates this whole list of positives, right? That we may or may not be conscious of that drives us to keep going back, and you create that habit.
Mhm.
Those neural pathways opened up,
Right.
which is why, like, when I was doing addiction recovery, one of the most important things wasn't just about talking about it, wasn't just about doing therapy, it wasn't just about stopping doing certain things. It was incorporating new things to do that opened up neural pathways and created, kind of hit those pleasure centers in the brain with connection with other people, with exercise, with accomplishment, with taking time away, right? Appreciating oneself. All of that matters.
Mhm.
All of those things give, it's almost like a constant rewrite of
Yeah.
the hardware and the software in the body. Yeah.
Hmm.
So that's another one.
I like it.
Yeah. What else? Anything else that you've experienced or that
Mm,
part of this?
I don't know, actually.
Okay.
I think we've covered the ones I've
Yeah,
experienced.
we've covered all that.
We've covered a lot.
And then of course I do think one of the other things I would say too, and you kind of talked about it before, intention, right? How
Sure.
often, to what degree you're willing to keep doing something. Like if you're
Mhm.
really willing to work hard on something,
Mhm.
kind of that level of intensity, or intentionality, you're going to go farther faster.
Sure.
Which sounds
Yeah.
like an obvious thing to say, right? But when we're talking about this, when we're talking about generational differences, particularly in an era where we're all like, well, I'm just this way. This is how I am,
Mhm.
which you hate,
I
right?
do hate
And
that.
people say this
Hate
is
that.
just how I am, right? Yeah, you can't stand that. So
No, I don't. Anyways, I'm gonna get real passionate really fast.
right, right. So then that all this begs the question, like if this is true for all of us, right? No matter what our generation is, with allowing for the fact that as we get older, this can be more and more of a challenge. What does all this talking about? Like if you could bring all of this into the conversation you had last night,
Mhm.
what would you be adding to the conversation, or what perspectives do you think it would give you?
That's a really good question. It would be a bit of a struggle, I'll be honest, because
Mm,
I always go back to my defaulted passionate answer of, like,
which is?
that type of stuff. Just and I don't know where it comes from. I think because I feel like I'm a bit caught in between the generations of, I feel by default I'm of an older generation where I am just dedicated and I work hard and I'm willing to stay until the job is done type of thing.
You grew up in a home that emphasized that too, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, I
that's
did.
part
Yeah,
of it.
hard work was definitely ingrained in
Right,
there.
right.
And there is a part of me that I see the younger generations and I almost fear becoming like them because I don't want to lose that aspect.
Oh,
And yes, oddly to say that out
no,
loud,
I appreciate
but
that.
there is something about that. And but then I'm like, but am I looking at it like, if I become more like the generation that I actually am from, is that a bad thing?
Mm,
Because there are, like we said in the first segment, there are good merits to both.
absolutely,
But I
absolutely.
think maybe it's just a personal, like, I really value the fact that I like to work hard, and, so it satisfies something in me to work hard and really
Mhm,
make sure that I, as an individual, did my best effort in
mhm.
what I set my mind to and what I put my word towards.
Right.
And I will always do that. And so I'm like, if I start to actually lean into the generation that I fit into and try to associate and relate to even the younger one, am I going to essentially become lazy?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's wow. I appreciate you sharing that. That gave me a lot to
That's the
think about.
truth.
Yeah, it gave me a lot to think about. In fact, I have a few thoughts on that I think we should jump into. But let's go ahead and take a second break
Okay.
before we do that.
Cliffhanger.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate. Wow, thanks for sharing that, Ashley.
You're welcome.
That gave me a whole lot. So, come back in a minute, and we'll see where we end up on this here on
Did I
Staying
broke
Power.
the mouth?
Yeah. See you in a minute.
Hello, I'm Chris Erdman. Every Wednesday at 8 a.m. on KKNW, I sit down with inspiring entrepreneurs, creative minds, and game changers to uncover the real stories behind their business. On my show, Made of More, we explore the challenges that they've overcome, the breakthroughs that they've celebrated, and the mindset that drives them forward. If you're ready to unlock your full entrepreneurial potential, Made of More is the show for you, because here we know you are made of more. Every Wednesday at 8 a.m. on KKNW.
Is your eyesight changing?
I can't read this anymore.
Don't lose hope. People just like you are working every day using Braille, screen magnification, speech technology, and other tools and blindness skills. Your eyesight may have changed, but your goals, they don't have to. We can help. Visit us on the web at blind.org. The National Federation of the Blind. Live the life you want.
Working hard to put a smile on your face. Alternative Talk 1150.
Welcome back to Staying Power. JD here with Ashley.
Hello.
And today we're talking about work ethic, kind of the differences between generational understandings of all that. And, I put the word out, Ashley. I would love to hear what people's opinions are. And we've got one in real time on the live stream. Cherry has written in. And Eric, could you, he's putting it up on the stream if you're watching it, but would you mind reading it for our listeners, what Cherry had to say about this?
Sure. Cherry says, learning to play drums at age 70 is probably helping me create new brain pathways.
It is.
And it utilizes both my body and my brain. I wasn't even looking forward this new adventure, and it just plopped into my life. The fact that I stepped up to the challenge is what made the difference.
Oh, that's incredible.
Love that.
That's
Thank
incredible.
You, Cherry.
Thank you, Cherry. At age 70. See, I mean, it underscores that. And
does she know your mom?
Yeah, my mom's in a garage
together?
band who's 80 years old. She's about to turn 80 and she's in a garage band. She's a keyboardist.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's a great example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because everything we just talked about, right? Willingness, openness, curiosity. And then, I mean, look what that does, right? That sense of accomplishment and willing to share it with the rest of the world. Thank you, Cherry, for chiming in there in real time. Really appreciate that.
So cool.
That's very cool. Okay, so with that, before the break, Ashley, you were talking about kind of your default positions on that, and that got me thinking. There's a few things I want to say before we kind of get into.
Always.
Sorry, judgment. Squelching my curiosity in real time, right on the air. Anyway, and Jason has chimed in. I'm glad you like your t-shirt. Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Jason. Good to hear from you. Jason at the Crawl Space, everybody.
Just saying.
All right. I love this interaction going on live in real time. All right.
So derailed.
I know, but this is great. This is what
good.
we want.
All for good reason.
All right. So a couple of things. I don't want us to give the impression to listeners that everything has to do with your willingness to engage with your brain and your body. There are mitigating circumstances here, right? Technology does have an effect on attention span, right? We all have that challenge, right? And that's across the board. When we have shorter attention spans, our ability to be intentional and follow through can be challenged and can be reduced. So that's something that is across the board. Second part that we have to acknowledge is mental health challenges.
Yep.
Traumas change how people see themselves, obviously, and how they confront problems and how they interact with other people in the workplace or outside of it. That has a role. conditions, right? Diagnoses can have a role. There are things that are going to be more difficult for people with certain conditions than aren't. So I don't want to make this sound like a one size fits all, but the general part of this is that regardless, and I've seen this in experience with clients, and I know you have, and studies reflect this, even with people who are working through traumas or have conditions, can find ways, maybe unique to them, that they can continue to engage in this process where neuroplasticity can remain a thing that benefits them, particularly if it's integrated with how they treat their body, how they understand their body, how they listen to their body, how they nourish their body. So I think all of that, I want to make sure that I make that clear, right, from all of this. So, okay, so with that in mind, Ashley, we always like to take our last segment and talk a little bit about what can people do with all this now that we've been talking about it. So with that, as a coach, right, and as in your experience as a manager and having talked about this now, what are some things that, people can do, right, on their own or in their workplace? If it was you within this conversation you were having, or if you were talking to the person you're having the conversation with, what are some things you would say to yourself or to them to kind of bring this about a little bit more?
I would say I would start with self-reflecting a lot. It's always good to really take some quiet time and to really look at yourself and try and not be biased. We always give ourselves a pass, right? We judge everyone else and gives ourselves a pass on the same things or different things. But it's good to really try and look at yourself in third person and who you are as an individual and really analyze in this aspect I was talking about, like working hard and what does that look like? And for some people, it's like, are you in that aspect? Are you really giving it your full effort, whatever the thing might be? Or are you doing what is habitual and you're like, oh no, but that is me doing the full effort. It's like, but is that defaulted? And if it's on autopilot and defaulted, is it really your present focused best effort?
Right.
Or are you just like, man, I put in the time because I was there for 40 hours a week. 40 hours a week is a lot of work. And depending on what the work is, that can be very grueling. But there are times, and I say this when I was younger, I was like, "Ugh, I put in 40 hours this week." And then I'm like, but was I really like working hard in all 40 of those hours? Was there ever a time where I'm like, did that really count? But this is coming from my perspective of like, no, you should be working very diligently and focused and whatnot. And so we kind of talked a little bit in that conversation I was having, but even when I'm managing people is to really reevaluate yourself.
Right.
And is this your best? Do you want to give your best?
Right.
Should you?
Right. Right. And in the work environment, I think it's obviously when you run a business, your results are what you're shooting for. The results that make your business better, whether that's increased profits or increased customer satisfaction or both, whatever the case may be. We can tend to focus so much on that we either believe we have a certain process that everybody must follow to get there, or the goal is so important that you don't establish across all the generations in your workforce what the best processes are, or you don't spend time learning how each person does it. So for example, what comes up for me is we tend to, and employers tend to reward the people who can think on their feet the fastest and vocalize that. They're seen as smarter, they're seen as more put together, they're seen as more constructive, that they're participating more, that they're more of an asset. However, that doesn't mean just because somebody thinks well on their feet that the solution they pitch out there is going to be any better than the person who doesn't think well on their feet, takes time to process something, perhaps takes 30 minutes, 90 minutes, never says anything in the meeting, but is really taking everything in, and then can come up with a solution that actually might be better than 6 people who were thinking well on their feet. So where do you want to invest more? If you want to invest more in getting the right outcome, perhaps recognizing that person needs 30 to 90 minutes, knowing that you can check in with them later on and say, hey, I know in the meeting you were taking all that in, 90 minutes later. What thoughts do you have on it now? Not making everything about the urgent answer to a problem right in that moment, if at all possible. That's a big part of it, because then the people who are more introverted, the people who don't think as well on their feet, people who perhaps are neurodivergent, have a place at the table. And what we know about younger people who fit those categories is if they feel like they have a place at the table and they're seen, they're listened to, they will perform the way you're talking about.
Yeah.
Right. So what's the problem? Is it really that they don't have the quote unquote work ethic, or the people who are determining what they're doing every day don't see how well they work individually that's different from everybody else?
I would agree.
Yeah. And I would say the problem is probably there.
I really like that. Well, and commonly what you see, and I have been in this situation before, is, you always hear like all the work gets thrown on the toughest, strongest shoulders, right? So it's like the person who is like really grinding and who they know we can count on them to get the job done. They get tasked with like everything. And then the people who are maybe they work a little bit slower, or they are not the most focused, diligent person, they tend to get a pass. They're a little bit more lackadaisical, and they're like, well, we want to task it to that person because who knows when it's going to get done. And then too much of that will cause problems. And I'm like, that person is equally deserving of a tough, heavy task as the person with the strong shoulders, because if you always levy it to just one side, eventually that person will burn out, and two, they will see the unfairness of like, I'm doing everything always. And I know some people shy away from giving certain things to people because they're like, well, I don't know when it's going to get done. I'm like, but that's not a reason. You can still give that person things to do and curate it in a way that's going to fit whatever, circumstance it might be. But they are just as willing and able. They should be, at least willing, but they are just as able. And you know what? Give them the opportunity to really support them and show them like, look at what you can do. Instead of being like, slacker, you're always going to be a slacker, because then they're also going to think about themselves that way.
Yep, absolutely. And it's so funny when you said that. I've had business owners with employees who dealing with this question, right? Who say to me when I put these things out there for them, be like, boy, that sounds like a lot of work on my part. And my first response is not the one that comes to my head, which is, right? I tend not to say that.
I say that out loud.
Right. Right. Well, what I do say to them is not any more so than the flexibility, curiosity, and innovation you have to show in the product you're making, or what you're producing, or how you run your business. We tend to have a feel sometimes where we treat, here's the business goals, here's the product, here's all this. That is everything. The workforce is kind of an extension of that, right? Or we separate it out and go, well, no, that's not the same thing. If you approach it the same way, we're not asking people to make huge leaps in their understanding of how to communicate with people or how to frame this, particularly if they're business people. It's just looking at your people not as a product, but the process you have to be just as innovative and curious and open about running as you are in how you highly, highly profitize your business. So I know that sounds real, I don't know, real technical, but I don't think it is, right? Because it's a human question in all of that. So there's one other one that comes up for me, but I want to hear what comes up. No, go ahead. No, what do you think? You're good?
I'm good. It's all you. I do not want to get in the way of these words.
Empathy.
Okay.
Recognizing that people are different. Recognizing that somebody, whether they're 24 years old or 44 years old or 64 years old in your work environment, care about the job that they're in, hopefully, right? Would love to be in a place that they love to work.
Right.
Would love to be in a place where they feel like they're a part of a larger team, right? Where accomplishment on an individual level or on a group level is recognized. Maybe not always rewarded publicly. Some people don't like that, but recognized, right? And incentivized in whatever that looks like. Those are all things that we want. In the end, in our relationships, we want to be seen. We want to be known. We want people to be okay with who we are. We can have a tendency in the workplace to say, okay, all that stuff doesn't matter nearly as much, or if at all, other than the work that has to be done today. That's a false divide in my mind, because that removes empathy from the equation, right? What's the best way to get this person who doesn't do things the way you do
Mhm.
to go in the same direction? And those are questions about the values of a business, the values of an organization. It could be the values of a family, it could be the values of a relationship. Do you have those conversations? And in the business sense, do you hire people who have similar values,
Mhm.
right? In that regard, those seem to me to be the places to start. Empathy's got to be there, right? And I know right now people are saying, well, that just sounds soft and soft skills. It's the hard results that matter. You will not get the hard results you want if you ignore all the soft diplomacy, if you will, of working with people, because that's what we want. That's how we want to be treated, frankly.
Oh, well, yes.
Right?
I would
Exactly.
concur.
Exactly. So what's all coming up for you on all this?
That I like this topic. I think, I mean, there's so much we could
I know.
say to
I
it
know. We
and
could
go
keep
with
going.
it, but
Yeah.
I do really like what you said about that, about trying to approach it with an empathetic perspective
Yeah.
of also just seeing an individual of where they're at
Mhm.
and what their strengths are, and that's just it, is as you get to know people, everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, and if that person is they love their job and they love the team and they're still trying to figure out where they fit, there is probably a home for them
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Because that is the type of person you want to really hang on to
Mhm.
and find their strengths and find where that will work
Absolutely.
for you. And also, if people are in not their strongest suits, it's okay to pull them out and relocate them.
Yeah.
Because they may feel a little, and obviously have the conversation, but in the long run, it's going to support them so much better and
Yeah.
they will feel better
Absolutely.
knowing that they're actually doing something where they're seeing their results
Mhm.
and they're like, well, that was me. I
Absolutely.
did that. And they can be proud of that.
Absolutely. And that's a great point. And I think the easiest way for anybody listening to start accessing this right away, you don't have to read a bunch of books. You don't even need to re-listen to this episode. You can approach it whether you're a manager like Ashley is, a business owner like Jason at Crawlspace, somebody who at 70 years old like Cherry is learning the drums,
Mhm.
or if you're just an employee somewhere, it's one simple step. Being curious about observing how other people around you do the things they do and be open to what comes to you. Why do they do that? Why do they approach that? Just pay attention. Just notice. If you intentionally do that noticing, start to see things, and the ideas that you have on what would be best, what would work best, will come. Because when you do that, when you're curious about someone else,
Mhm.
you're actually being really present.
It's
And
true.
that is the key to everything in the end, is
Mhm.
being present. Okay. Whew. That was a great topic.
That was good.
All out of one conversation that you had last night. It'd be interesting to see if you revisit that conversation in the future, how that goes.
I'm
So,
sure I will.
all right. All right. Well, thanks so much, Ashley, for bringing that up.
You're welcome.
All right. All right. And thanks you to all of you who are listening and watching to this episode of Staying Power. Remember, once again, if you missed any of this episode or other episodes, you can get this as a podcast wherever you get your podcast. You can also find a lot of our episodes on our YouTube channel. You can also find in the show notes as a podcast here at YouTube or on our website, 1150 AM KKNW, all the ways you can reach out to us, whether that's on Instagram, whether that's at our email, stayingpowershow@gmail.com, and a whole bunch of other ways. We have a lot of stuff coming up soon, so be paying attention on social media because there's a lot of exciting things
There
afoot. There's a
is
reason
so
I'm
much
so
going on.
busy, everybody. And if you ever want to run into us, just take a shot. Go down to Crawlspace Gastropub, Mercer Island. You might very well find us there, and then you can buy Ashley a drink. All right.
Great.
So we will be back next week with another way to build a better life. Until then, I'm JD.
I'm Ashley.
We will see you soon. Take care, everybody.
Bye.